Either there's something really wrong with us, or this business just isn't being run the right way.
And you can blame it on these guys. Rorion Gracie, Art Davie, and Bob Merowitz founded the UFC in 1993 under Semaphore Entertainment Group, SEG.
There was a quote from TV Guide after the first UFC. This is the bloodiest, most brutal spectacle in the history of mankind.
It was one of those things you kind of wanted to watch, but didn't know if you should be.
It was basically old marketing by the old owners just to make it sound crazy.
If SEG made one key mistake, it was pissing off the wrong American hero.
Well, eventually Senator John McCain stepped in.
What it was at the beginning was human cockfighting. It was. I mean, I've seen people repeatedly getting smashed in the face with a guy sitting on top of them. That's not a sport.
He said, what are you doing? You can't go put on fights that aren't regulated by the Athletic Commission.
There was no referee. There was nothing. It was terrible.
The owner basically said, trust me when I say this. I've been in business for a long time. You can't mess with the government. Tell the government you're not going to do what they want you to do. See what happens.
McCain leads a campaign to ban the UFC across the US. He pressures cable companies to stop showing UFC events.
John McCain to ban Ultimate Fighting, taking it too far.
When that happens, Gracie and Davie ditch SEG, leaving Bob Merowitz alone at the helm of the UFC.
So now the cable companies wouldn't put them on pay-per-view. The ATM machine was cut off.
Check this out. Those are the revenues of the UFC per event from UFC 1 to UFC 27. Little did Bob know, the two guys who would end up saving his ass were sitting right there at UFC 27. And one of them prepared his entire life for that moment.
I had a hardcore upbringing, I was the broke kid. My dad was an alcoholic and was never around. And when he did show up, you didn't want him around. You know what I mean?
I come from a single mom who worked hard and didn't have a lot of money.
So me and my sister were home a lot alone. One of the things I think about growing up alone is, there's a lot of stuff that you have to learn on your own.
He just had this great personality. People were attracted to him. They wanted to be his friend. They like hanging out with him.
You went to school with Lorenzo, your partner now.
Me and Dana go way back to the time we were like 14, 15 years old. Knew each other all through high school.
I got kicked out of high school a bunch of times. I was just never a school guy.
I mean, Dana has a high school education and that's it.
I was a bouncer. I did paving. I worked at the Four Seasons as a bellman.
My mother used to tell me that I was going to be just like my father and not amount to anything. And I was going to be pumping gas into my friends' cars. My mom did a lot of shit like that. And I'm not saying that that's what drove me, but that didn't hurt. I always knew I wanted to be in the fight business.
Half the battle in life is figuring out who you are and what you want to do for the rest of it.
I was literally standing in the lobby one day and I'm like, what the hell am I doing here? And I walked out the front door and one of my good friends, who was the doorman, says, what are you doing? I said, I'm quitting. He's like, what? What are you gonna do? I said, I want to be in the fight business. He said, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life.
After high school, kind of went our own ways. I went off to college. He went off and did what he did in Boston.
Dana moves from Vegas to Boston, where he starts teaching boxing.
So I was involved in boxing, then I had boxing gyms.
And it doesn't take long before trouble finds him.
One day I'm actually in there teaching a class and these guys literally walk right into the middle of the class. And they're like, hey, we need to talk to you. And I said, I'm teaching a class here. And they're like, we need to talk to you outside. They start asking me if I know who they are, and I don't.
When he walked down the street, the sidewalk shook. We're talking about the notorious mobster James Whitey Bulger.
He was the inspiration for Jack Nicholson's character in the movie The Departed.
Heavy lies the crown, sort of thing.
Johnny Depp also played him in Black Mass.
The last thing I would do if I was planning to harm you is to warn you in advance, you dumb.
Give me 3 words that describe Whitey Bulger.
Stone cold killer.
That's Southie, where he did most of his crime. He murdered people there, he buried people there, and he went to sleep there.
Whitey Bulger had a guy who worked under him, and his name was Kevin Weeks. Yeah, they wanted $2,500 from me.
21 years old, you might as well ask me for $25,000. Right. I didn't have $2,500.
What do you do?
I ignored him. I didn't do anything.
I tried to avoid him for a while, and you can only avoid that shit for so long. And
months went by, and one day I got a call at my apartment.
The guy's like, you got till tomorrow at 1 to pay us. And I said, or what?
You're gonna find out what.
I said, okay. I hung up the phone.
Picked it back up and called Delta and got a one-way ticket to Vegas.
Dana moves back to Vegas, where he reconnects with Lorenzo Fertitta.
And at the time, I was on the Nevada State Athletic Commission. So we obviously had some common interest.
And we started taking jiu-jitsu. Through that, we started to meet a lot of the fighters, and we were blown away by these guys. I started to represent and manage Chuck the Iceman Liddell and Tito Ortiz. And I got into this huge contract battle over Tito's contract with the old owner.
That's how Dana ends up sitting at a table with Bob Merowitz.
We got into this contract battle over Tito Ortiz's contract. I was talking about pay-per-view, and he flipped out. He says, there is no pay-per-view, there's no money. And he freaks out, and I was like, holy shit, this thing's in trouble. They were going bankrupt.
We hung up, I called Frank and Lorenzo.
So Lorenzo, I just heard that the UFC is going to be sold.
These guys are in big trouble, they're losing money. I think we can buy it.
So I called Bob, literally cold called him, and he was looking for somebody to put up $1 million for 50% of the company. I ended up calling back and just said, look, we'd be interested in doing the deal, but we want to buy the whole thing.
And a month later, we own the company.
So the Fertitta brothers create a parent company that owns the UFC. They call it Zuffa, which means to fight in Italian. Zuffa's very first employee is Dana White.
They made me the president of the company, and they gave me 10%. My office was a broom closet with a telephone when we started this thing. Everybody they had, all these smart guys and all these geniuses that came from Harvard and everywhere else, hated this thing.
Do you agree with Dana that MMA will one day be the biggest sport in the whole world?
I do, I really do, and I know that sounds crazy.
You want to be bigger than the NFL. That's going to be hard.
Well, not on a global basis.
The NFL. There's nothing bigger than the NFL. It's huge.
And yet, NFL Europe failed twice.
In India, cricket's huge. I don't know about you, but I don't give a shit about cricket. Soccer is big all over the world. It's not that big here. And the list goes on and on of sports that work in other countries and don't work in other countries. The one thing that I believe would work everywhere is fighting.
I don't care what color you are, what country you come from, or what language you speak. Fighting is in our DNA. We get it and we like it. We're human beings.
The challenges that Dana had to take on to pull the UFC out of its misery would be seen by many as impossible.
People think I swear a lot now. You should have heard me the first 3 years of this company.
First of all, when they bought the UFC, all they got for $2 million was pretty much just a logo.
You bought the name and a
old wooden octagon
for $2 million.
Yeah, and I think we had like 11 guys under contract. He had sold everything off. The DVD rights, all the old library, the video game rights, the merchandise rights, all the things that you need to build a brand were gone. We didn't even own UFC.com. UFC.com used to be user-friendly computers.
He's dealing with a sport that is banned on TV, banned in most states, and banned internationally.
Venues did not want the UFC. This wasn't allowed on pay-per-view. Porn is on pay-per-view. Our goal was to buy it and get it on free television. People thought that that was insane.
UFC stars like Ken Shamrock or Mark Coleman are gone, either to wrestling or to Japan, where the UFC's biggest competitor, Pride FC, is killing it.
The only two companies in this world that matter are the UFC and Pride.
In 2001, Pride was already filling up stadiums in Japan, a country culturally much more accepting of mixed martial arts. They have the best fighters in the world, including the American ones.
And make no mistake about it, the UFC is coming here to kick your ass.